This really sets the scene perfectly for our next speaker, Sam, also from Finland, who will talk more specifically about the very significant work they're doing exploring the implications of these dysbiotic drifts on aggressive behaviour. Thanks and welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Susan. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be here. Um, my name is Samuli Rautava. I'm a neonatologist and at the Helsinki University Hospital and an associate professor in neonatology at the University of Helsinki. And I've been working with Erika for almost a quarter of a century. And as a neonatologist, I'm really focused on the first moments of life and the childbirth and early infancy, the neonatal period. And Erika mentioned the changing environment and our changing contact with microbes. And I think the very first moments of life are an exceptional moment for the development of many of our future outcomes or formation of risks with different exposures. And there has been a drastic change in the way we are exposed to microbes during that period. We have here two pictures from childbirth or a newborn baby, not very long apart, maybe a couple of decades apart. On the left-hand side panel, we see a lady in France giving birth at home during the first decades of the 20th century. And we can see that she's in her own bed, in her own linen. There is a midwife who's wearing an appropriate apron and rubber boots. And the older siblings are staring at the gate of life, welcoming their newcoming sister or brother. And we can imagine that this baby is not exposed to antibiotics and is not delivered by C-section, will receive breast milk in a few moments. And the bacterial exposure for this baby is immense. The baby is lucky to survive. There's grave danger in bacteria, but there's also a healthy exposure to environmental and skin and gut bacteria from the mom. On the right-hand side panel, we see a newborn baby and a proud father coming to see his son or daughter, and we see a very drastically different situation. The baby is seen through a glass. She is held by a nurse and not by the mother. Appropriate clothing, very clean environment. And what has really changed is we are still coming to the world, not formed from the foams of the ocean like Venus here, but we are born through. We should be born through a very bacteria-enriched birth canal, but we have increasing rates of cesarean section delivery, which has a profound impact on bacterial colonization. Breastfeeding continues to be an issue, and breastfeeding is associated with significant health benefits and changes in the gut microbiota. The contact with the environment is different, and we use more and more antibiotics, which are life-saving drugs, but they also kill bacteria. And we have, in our research, used early bacterial exposure as a model for what might result from early bacterial disturbances and early gut microbiota disturbances. This is a paper we published a couple of years ago where we looked at the impact of early antibiotic exposure in a cohort of about 12,000 babies from the Turku area in Finland. And we looked at children who were exposed to antibiotics during the first days of life and also the impact of antibiotics during the first 6 months of life on child growth. And on the left-hand side panels, I'm not sure if you can see, but what we discovered that especially in male children, exposure to antibiotics just during the first days of life was associated with growth throughout the first 6 years of life. And the babies who were exposed to antibiotics tended to be a little bit shorter and a little bit lighter. So there's a slight growth disturbance, whereas the antibiotics later after the neonatal period, but during early childhood, were associated with elevated BMI throughout the first 6 years of life in a dose-dependent manner. So this tells us there is something going on with antibiotic exposure, and the timing of the exposure seems to be very important for the outcomes. The next step was to show whether this is a causal relationship. And we actually took fecal samples from babies who had been exposed to antibiotics, and we could show that all throughout the first 2 years of life, their gut microbiota was indeed different. And when we took the 1 month fecal samples and transplanted them into mice who were devoid of microbiota, germ-free mice, we could see that especially, again, the male mice failed to grow when they had the microbiota of an antibiotic-exposed human child, which tells us that there is a causal link with between antibiotics, the gut microbiota difference, gut microbiota disturbance, and what happens with child growth. Well, I was meant to talk about aggression. We have also been looking at neurodevelopmental things, and in our cohort, it's a register-based cohort, so we can see a whole lot, maybe a little bit more ADHD in girls exposed to antibiotics, but then we needed to resort to, again, to a mouse study, and our friends at the Koren lab in Israel, they conducted these sophisticated studies where they exposed mice to antibiotics or they used germ-free mice, and they could show that mice that didn't have a gut microbiota or had a gut microbiota disturbed by antibiotics tended to be more aggressive. When they, sorry about my dog, when they met another mouse, they were less likely, more likely attack, and they attacked faster. And whether this applies to children, we again used gut microbiota from antibiotics-exposed children, the lower right-hand side panel, and the mice who got the microbiota from a human child exposed to antibiotics 1 month prior, we could see increased aggression in these mice who received the microbiota from antibiotic-exposed children, as opposed to mice who received the gut microbiota from non-exposed children. And this is alarming. It's an experimental model. It's a very reductionist model, but it suggests, again, a link between gut microbiota-induced, antibiotic-induced gut microbiota disturbances and even aggressive behavior, albeit in mice. So I think what we can conclude is that early gut microbiota is associated with long-term health outcomes, and the links are causal. We've established them with experimental models and also with clinical trials. And especially the connection with behavior is only emerging, but it is alarming. But luckily, as Erika mentioned, the gut microbiota might also be a target for future interventions. I thank you for your time. Thank you.